There are moments in history that don't begin with an explosion, but with an eerie silence. When a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier enters a strategic zone, when an entire nation activates every air defense system overnight, and when the head of a regime vanishes from public view, that's no longer a drill. That's the sign of a point of no return. In this video, we're going to unpack what's really happening between the United States and Iran, why the next 72 hours could reshape the entire Middle East, and what is pushing the world to the brink of its largest conflict since Iraq in 2003. If you're interested in deep, slow, and headline-free geopolitical analysis, make sure to subscribe to the channel now. And with that, let's begin the story. Not with an official announcement. Not with an emergency resolution under the United Nations dome. The standoff between the US and Iran in the opening days of 2026 began in a much quieter and much more terrifying way, with the silent appearance of a massive steel giant on the ocean's surface, carrying enough destructive power to change the fate of an entire region. When the nuclear-powered supercarrier USS Abraham Lincoln entered the area of responsibility of US Central Command, there were no fireworks, no dramatic proclamations, but to those who speak the language of strategy, it was a very clear message. The Middle East has witnessed countless wars, but rarely has a crisis opened with such deliberate silence. No gunfire, no ultimatums, just military movements too large to dismiss as routine drills, yet too ambiguous to call an act of war. And it's exactly that ambiguity that makes the situation so dangerous. A declared war gives both sides time to prepare mentally, shape public opinion, and draw clear lines. But a silent confrontation leaves every decision in a gray zone, where every move can be interpreted in the worst possible way. And in that gray zone, even the smallest misstep can become the spark. The timing of this deployment is no coincidence. Iran is at its most fragile state since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Prolonged protests, waves of bloody crackdowns, widespread exhaustion, and growing skepticism have eroded the regime's political foundation. More critically, cracks within the power structure, once tightly hidden, are now becoming visible. A regime that once ruled through fear and iron discipline is entering a phase where it must ask itself whether it can still control its own machinery. On the other side, Washington is not hiding its hardline stance. The Trump administration doesn't speak in delicate diplomatic phrases. Red lines are drawn openly, bluntly, and with deliberate pressure. But the real message isn't in the words, it's in the actions backing them. Warships, aircraft, missile defense systems, and a full deployment structure all point to one reality. The US isn't just sending a message, it's preparing to act on it. A major crisis rarely erupts from a single event. It usually stems from the convergence of several factors: a weakened adversary, a determined opponent, and a regional backdrop thick with tension. The Middle East in early 2026 checks all those boxes. And as the silence drags on, it doesn't reduce the risk of war. It only sharpens a more terrifying question. If no shots have been fired, then what exactly is being prepared behind that silence? The answer is slowly revealing itself, not on diplomatic stages, but across the sea and in the skies, where a vast military machine is operating not to impress, but to be ready. And right at the center of it, the role of the carrier strike group, as a deterrent more than a threat, is beginning to emerge as the focal point of the entire game now unfolding on the board. The presence of the US carrier strike group at this moment doesn't resemble a typical display of power. It's not designed to impress the public, nor is it meant to send a vague message like, "We're here." In American military thinking, a carrier strike group is only deployed when Washington wants to apply enough pressure to force the adversary to reconsider all of its options. The USS Abraham Lincoln is not a lone ship. It's the core of a fully integrated warfighting ecosystem. On its deck are dozens of advanced fighter jets capable of carrying out sustained missions in attack, reconnaissance, air defense suppression, and electronic warfare. This is a type of power that doesn't need to fire a shot to be effective. Its mere presence in the region forces the opponent to spread out its forces, keep its entire air defense network on prolonged high alert, and drain its resources just to wait. The most critical factor is flexibility. A carrier strike group can serve as a strategic deterrent while also being ready to switch to offensive operations at a moment's notice. It gives Washington complete control over the tempo of escalation. The U.S. can ramp up pressure without crossing the threshold into war, or cross it instantly with a single command. Accompanying the carrier are destroyers and cruisers equipped with long-range cruise missiles. These aren't weapons deployed for show. They're designed for opening strikes, targeting command centers, radar installations, air bases, and critical military infrastructure. With a single coordinated launch, the entire battlefield landscape could shift within hours. Equally significant is where the strike group is positioned. It hasn't pushed deep into the Persian Gulf, a narrow and vulnerable space prone to asymmetric attacks, but is instead operating in the Indian Ocean. This indicates that the U.S. isn't seeking direct confrontation, but prefers to maintain a safe distance while retaining the capability to deliver precise strikes from afar. It's a form of cold deterrence, close enough to be impossible to ignore, but far enough to minimize risk. In the skies, the addition of long-range fighter squadrons and electronic warfare aircraft signals that the U.S. is preparing for a scenario far more complex than a show of force. Electronic warfare, air defense suppression, precision preemptive strikes. These are the hallmarks of modern warfare, where victory isn't determined by troop numbers, but by the ability to disable the opponent's systems from the outset. What's notable is that this entire structure has been deployed in relative silence. No fiery speeches, no public ultimatums, and it's that silence that amplifies the message. Washington is telling Tehran, every option is on the table and time is not on your side. But no matter how carefully calculated, a show of force only works if the adversary still has the capacity to receive and respond to it rationally. And that's exactly what makes the situation more dangerous than ever. Because at this moment, Iran is no longer the stable, confident, and unified power structure it once was. As external military pressure mounts, it's not just Iran's defensive units or military installations that are affected. The shockwave hits the very core of the regime, where life or death decisions are now being made in a climate of fear, fragmentation, and uncertainty. And from here, the story is no longer just about how the U.S. is projecting its strength, but about how Iran is even surviving under this storm of pressure, as its supreme leader disappears from view and authority begins to fracture in ways never seen before. In Tehran, the most dangerous movements aren't happening in the streets. They're unfolding behind closed doors. When reports confirmed that the supreme leader had retreated into the underground bunker network, it signaled far more than a personal security precaution. In the history of the Islamic Republic, such a move has always indicated that the regime believes a threat has reached the deepest core of its power. Not protests, not sanctions, but the possibility of a direct strike on the command center itself. The transfer of day-to-day authority to Mojtaba Khamenei reflects a state of emergency never officially acknowledged. This isn't a carefully planned succession, it's a survival reflex. When power is handed over in haste, it doesn't create stability, it exposes fragility. Decision-making becomes scattered. Command chains grow longer, more tangled, and more vulnerable to disruption than ever before. Within Iran's power structure, the fear now doesn't just stem from the US or Israel, but from a deeper question. Is the regime still cohesive enough to survive a major shock? Many key security figures were purged in previous internal battles. The resulting power vacuums have been filled with loyalists who lack experience. Loyalty can ensure obedience, but it cannot replace competence in a crisis. In such a state, every decision becomes a reactive, instinctive defense. The regime is no longer shaping the game, it's buying time. Time to suppress more dissent, time to hope international pressure eases, time to wait for a mistake from the other side. But prolonging the standoff also means sustaining a permanent state of tension, something that wears down both the society and the security apparatus. The most dangerous mindset is that of a regime feeling besieged. When leadership believes it faces the threat of decapitation, the natural reaction is to withdraw, trust no one, and limit information flow. That might offer short-term protection for individuals, but it severely weakens the system's ability to coordinate. A regime built on tight control is now forced to operate in fragmentation, where every faction's first instinct is self-preservation. That sense of insecurity spreads rapidly through the military and security forces. When orders become unclear, When rumors spread faster than official directives, trust in the chain of command begins to crack. And in a regime like Iran's, where the security apparatus is its lifeline, any sign of hesitation carries extreme danger. It's in this context that Tehran has turned to the one thing that can reassure both domestic and foreign audiences: the image of military strength. If they can't prove the stability of leadership, they must at least demonstrate the country's ability to defend itself. And so the air defense drills are activated, radars run nonstop, missiles are rolled out from bunkers and paraded before state media cameras. But this display is more psychological than strategic. It's meant to reassure the public that the regime still controls the skies, that every threat has been accounted for. At the same time, it sends a message to the outside world: Iran is ready to retaliate. However, the very need to keep repeating that message reveals a deeper truth. Internal confidence is eroding. When a nation truly feels secure, it doesn't need to say so over and over. But when its survival is in question, every reassurance becomes rushed and heavy-handed. And in this tense atmosphere, Iran's air defense system steps into the spotlight, not just as a military shield, but as the final symbol of its ability to protect itself. The real question is, behind all these urgent drills, how fragile is Tehran's actual faith in that shield? In those days, the skies over Iran grew louder, but in a very different way. Radars were kept running around the clock, air defense units were placed on the highest state of alert, and state media saturated the airwaves with footage of missiles streaking into the sky, accompanied by bold declarations of Iran's unshakable defense of national airspace. On the surface, it looked like a vigilant, proactive, and decisive Iran. But beneath that surface lay a growing sense of unease that was becoming harder to conceal. Air defense drills intensified across the country, from Tehran to Shiraz, from densely populated cities to militarily sensitive areas. Domestically developed systems were paraded as symbols of self-reliance. Their names were repeated like mantras, technical specs exaggerated, and every test launch captured in dramatic close-ups. But what these images couldn't hide was a sobering reality. Most of these systems had never faced the ultimate test, going head-to-head against an adversary with overwhelming superiority in modern warfare technology. After past airstrikes, Iran's most vital air defense platforms suffered serious damage. Patchwork fixes and domestic replacements may help maintain the image of control, but they cannot bridge the technological gap. In modern warfare, air defense isn't just about shooting down targets. It's a hidden chess match between sensors, data, jamming, and split-second decision-making. And that is precisely Iran's greatest vulnerability right now. Radar systems might spot conventional targets, but when up against stealth platforms and advanced electronic warfare, everything becomes blurred. When signals are jammed and data distorted, operators are forced to make decisions with incomplete information. One small error can lead to a mistaken launch, or worse, a failure to react in time to a precision strike. That's why these drills carry more psychological than military weight. They're designed to boost morale among air defense crews, to calm the domestic public, and to project a deterrent image abroad. But deterrence only works when the enemy believes the price of aggression is too high. In the current climate, even within Iran's own ranks, there's a growing understanding that their air defense shield may not hold up against a well-planned campaign. That anxiety is reflected in the increasing tempo of activity. When a system is truly confident, it doesn't need to constantly prove itself. On the contrary, repetitive displays are often a sign of internal doubt. And that doubt doesn't just exist in command centers, it spreads across society, where civilians watch footage of drills while whispering about the looming possibility of war. In such a state, air defense ceases to be merely a military tool. It becomes the last symbolic barrier of self-preservation, a psychological wall separating fear from the fragile hope that Iran can still endure. But if that wall is pierced, even once, the impact won't stop at the battlefield. It will strike at the regime's core confidence and the morale of its people. And that's precisely the pressure point Washington is watching closely. Because when an adversary clings to air defense as a symbol of survival, the question is no longer how long they can hold out, but rather, what does the U.S. truly aim to achieve with this pressure? Is this a calculated act of deterrence to force Tehran to step back? Or is it the opening move in a far broader strategy? One where the ultimate objective isn't just the skies over Iran, but the fate of the regime itself. The biggest question hanging over this entire crisis isn't about the number of warships or fighter jets deployed. It's about Washington's ultimate goal. What does the US really want from Iran at this critical moment? A temporary concession or a structural change to the balance of power in Tehran? For Donald Trump, pressure has never been merely defensive. In his political mindset, deterrence only works when it's forceful enough to compel the adversary to accept a new reality. The hardline statements from Washington, paired with the military's highest state of readiness, suggest the US is no longer satisfied with simply containing Iran, as in years past. They want to reshape Tehran's behavior by striking directly at the regime's sense of security. However, the line between deterrence and regime change is razor thin. A successful deterrent is one that forces the opponent to back down without a single shot fired. But when then the adversary is in survival mode, cornered by internal instability and external pressure, even deterrence can be perceived as a declaration of war. And that's the fine line Washington must weigh, hour by hour. The scenarios prepared by the Pentagon don't bear the marks of a prolonged invasion. There's no indication that the US intends to send ground troops deep into Iranian territory. Instead, every plan revolves around swift, precise strikes aimed at paralyzing command structures, air defenses, and the regime's repressive capabilities. This is 21st century warfare, not about seizing land, but about stripping an opponent of its ability to maintain control. If such strikes occur, they may never be publicly labeled as regime change, but the consequences could very well lead there. A regime already teetering on the edge, once stripped of its ability to defend its skies and maintain internal order, could collapse from within without the need for a foreign-backed replacement. It's a scenario Washington understands well, and it's the one Tehran fears most. But this is where the US calculus becomes complex. A weakened Iran might offer short-term strategic gains, but it also risks plunging the region into chaos. Proxy forces, rogue armed groups, and chain reactions across neighboring states could turn a quick and clean operation into a spiral of unpredictable fallout. Washington wants to apply maximum pressure, but without paying the price of an uncontrollable Middle East. That's why the US is playing a high-stakes game of nerves. They're applying just enough force to make Tehran believe that all the worst options are on the table, but also preserving a sliver of ambiguity, a narrow path where Iran could still back down without losing face entirely. It's a strategy built on pushing the opponent into making the hardest decision for themselves. The problem is time. As pressure intensifies by the hour and both sides remain on high alert, the greatest danger no longer lies in calculated decisions but in impulsive reactions. One side seeks to deter without striking. The other, fearing a strike, might choose to act first. And in that exact moment, the crisis enters its most dangerous phase. The next 72 hours are no longer just a period of waiting. They are a volatile window where every signal can be misread and every move could trigger a chain reaction. With both the US and Iran standing at the edge of their limits, a single misstep could tip this entire game of deterrence into a confrontation that no one is capable of stopping. The next 72 hours are the kind of window in which history is often written. Not in calm deliberation, but in chaos. Not through well-considered decisions, but through reactions made when people are too tense to think clearly. In the standoff between the US and Iran, this is the phase where neither side wants war, yet both are operating under conditions that make war more likely than ever. Iran enters these 72 hours in the mindset of a cornered state. Its leadership is isolated, its power structure fragmented, its internal confidence eroding. In that condition, every signal from the outside tends to be interpreted in the worst possible way. A reconnaissance flight might be seen as the prelude to an airstrike. A naval drill could be mistaken for the opening move of an attack. When fear becomes the primary lens through which the world is viewed, the line between defense and offense begins to dangerously blur. On the US side, the pressure is no less intense. With forces already deployed and the eyes of allies and the public fixed on every move, Washington must maintain the image of total control. An early concession could be read as weakness. A move too aggressive could cross a line they never intended to breach. In this fragile balance, every order must pass through layers of calculation, but time no longer allows for prolonged hesitation. The greatest risk lies in elements beyond direct control. A proxy force acting on its own, an incident at sea, or even a technical malfunction could become the spark for escalation. The history of the Middle East has seen more than one war erupt from events that neither side initially intended to turn into a full-blown conflict. In this current scenario, all it takes is a single missile launched by mistake, and the cycle of retaliation could begin before diplomacy even has a chance to respond. These 72 hours are also a psychological test. Decision makers in Tehran must wrestle with a life or death question. If they wait, will they be struck first? If they strike preemptively, will they trigger a devastating response? In Washington, the questions are just as haunting. If they hold back, will deterrence lose its credibility? If they act, will they unleash a war whose consequences spiral beyond their control? At such an extreme level of tension, strategic logic is easily overtaken by survival instinct. Decisions that should be made with calm analysis and full information are instead driven by prediction, perception, and sometimes gut feeling. And that's when chain reactions become most dangerous. A small action can provoke a far bigger response than expected. A strong response may then force the other side to hit back even harder, just to avoid losing face. That's why these 72 hours are not just a test of military strength, they're a test of crisis management. Do both sides have the clarity and restraint to avoid crossing the invisible line between deterrence and war? Or will the accumulated pressure collapse every calculation, giving way to a sequence of irreversible events? In moments like these, history rarely waits for the perfect answer. It only needs one mistake. Looking back at everything unfolding, it's clear that the Middle East is no longer in the familiar state of a temporary crisis. This is a moment where layers of history, power, and fear are colliding, creating a crossroads where every path forward carries long-term consequences. The confrontation between the US and Iran is not just a clash between two nations, it's a collision between two visions for the regional order after more than 2 turbulent decades. If war does break out, it won't resemble the conflicts of the past. There won't be ground forces advancing deep into enemy territory, no extended front lines. Instead, it will be fast, precise strikes aimed at the key nodes of power. Such a war may conclude quickly, but its aftershocks could last for years, possibly decades. The fall of a regime might happen swiftly, but that doesn't guarantee a swift return to stability. The resulting power vacuum, marginalized factions, and interventions by regional actors could plunge the Middle East into a new cycle of instability, more complex and harder to control. On the other hand, if war is avoided, that doesn't mean everything returns to normal. The extreme deterrence Washington has applied will leave deep scars in Iran's psyche and power structure. A regime once confident in its ability to withstand pressure is now being forced to reconsider its limits. Even if no shots are fired, the regional balance of power will shift, and the Iran that emerges from this moment will no longer be the Iran of years past. What matters most is the lesson this moment delivers to the entire Middle East. The region is entering a phase where the old rules of the game no longer offer security. The reliance on traditional deterrence, on fragile agreements, or on the belief that major conflicts can always be contained, these assumptions are being challenged head-on. Every nation in the region will have to ask itself where it stands in the emerging order and how much it's willing to risk to defend that position. At this moment, history is not yet written. It's being shaped, hour by hour, decision by decision, through every minor action and reaction. The next 72 hours may pass in silence, or they may mark the beginning of a new violent chapter. But regardless of which outcome unfolds, the Middle East after 2026 will not be the same. If you're someone who cares about the quiet strategic movements behind the loud headlines, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe war is imminent, or is this just deterrence pushed to its highest level? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can stay with us for deeper analysis as the world continues to change, day by day.